Welcome to the Love Lab Podcast, a safe place to get real about sex. Whether you're a man, woman, single, or couple, this is the show for you.
We are your hosts, Kevin Anthony and Céline Remy, and we are here to guide you to go from good to amazing in the bedroom and beyond.
All right, welcome back to the Love Lab Podcast. This is episode 133, and it's titled, How Your Attachment Style Affects Your Relationship. Okay, I almost can't believe we haven't done an attachment style episode so far at 133 episodes. We're just now getting to it. But one of the reasons why I say that is because we hear about attachment styles so frequently. We have multiple friends and even clients who are really big into attachment styles, and you can't have a conversation about their current relationship without them going, well, you see, because my attachment style, right? So obviously it's something that people are paying attention to. And I think it would be really good to have a great discussion about what they are, what it means for your relationship, how does it affect your sex life, and all that kind of stuff. So we have an expert on attachment styles today on the show, and we're going to dive deep into all of this. So if you're one of our friends who's constantly talking about attachment styles, do not turn this show off.
You might learn a thing or two.
Yeah.
So before we introduce today's guest, let's give a big shout out to our sponsor, Power and Mastery. So if you want to join the secret club of men who are great in bed, then check out Power and Mastery at powerandmastery.com. It is the most complete sexual mastery training for men. Whether you want to have harder erections, last longer, or increase your sexual skills, there is something for you at powerandmastery.com. Today we have Kirstie Taylor. She is a dating and relationship writer who found a loyal internet following through her candid essays. Her work has been featured in Cosmopolitan magazine, Well Plus Good, and the Washington Post, The Lily. She currently lives in LA, where she continues to write words that help with their biggest struggles in love. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Kirstie, for being here today. We're excited.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited. This is going to be so fun to talk about.
So I want to start at the beginning because some people might be wondering, what are attachment styles? What are they talking about? So why don't you give our listeners a little bit of an overview of what attachment styles are?
Totally. So attachment styles are an adult relationship theory that's based off of how we were raised as children. So it started in the 1950s by a guy named John Bowlby and a woman named Mary Ainsworth. And they studied the way that parents raise how parents raise their child affects their ability to have relationships as adults and their how they're able to experience intimacy. Since the 1950s, when it started to become a thing and a theory, there's just been so much studies in different aspects of attachments theory and how it affects your relationships, your sex life, your family relationships, everything. But essentially what it is, like to break it down, is that everyone has either one of four main attachment styles. And those are secure, anxious, dismissive avoidant, and fearful avoidant. A really great way to explain it is that it wasn't John Bowlby, it was another researcher did a test, and they called it the strange situation test. And essentially, like, these kids would be placed in this room and they would have their mom there and a researcher there, and the researcher would prompt the mom to leave, and they would study how the child reacted. So secure baby would be like, oh, my mom left, oh no, where did she go? But they could regulate their emotions, they'd calm down, and then they'd start playing with toys. An anxious baby would be like, oh my God, my mom left, and start breaking down and would not be able to self-regulate and would just not be okay until the mom came back inside. And then the two avoidants would just kind of be like, oh, it is what it is, and like just keep playing, and the mom would come back and they'd be like, oh, what's up? Like, not really fazed. And so that's kind of how that's like a very basic way of explaining the attachment styles in the sense of like how we were when we were kids. And they're formed because of things like how our parents raised us, how they were able to give us attention when we were babies. Like if we cried, Did they coddle us, or were they not around? Did they let us cry for longer than another baby, or were they really good and were they really attentive parents? But what's interesting about attachment style is that more recently they've realized that your attachment style can 100% change throughout your life. Once your parental relationship is replaced with romantic relationships, now you can have your attachment style change because of a romantic partner. Say you have someone who was really mean and emotionally abusive. All of a sudden you can go from secure to anxious, or you go from anxious to avoid it. And so, yeah, that was long-winded.
No, that's great. That gives people a good foundation. I'm curious just about one thing that you just said there at the end, that it can change. Is there any data or research, like how frequently does it change? Because I know that for most patterns and things that get ingrained in us from about 0 to 6, those things are extremely hard to change.
Yeah.
They're like hardwired into the system, right? So we're talking kind of about a similar thing. And I'm just curious, how often does it really change for people?
Oh, so yeah, it's not often that it changes. It has to either be really traumatic, like I said, with a very horrible relationship that really rocked your world, or that you put a lot of work into yourself to try and change it. But it's definitely not like you're flowing in between all the time. It's usually something that's really big that happens.
But I love that you're bringing this up, because a lot of people define themselves by, they do a test or they figure out, oh, I'm this attachment style, so therefore my whole life now is going to go this way, or like they read their horoscope and this is it, Well, I believe that these are trends, or they can show you what you have to deal with, your cards, but then you still choose how you want to play with the cards you have, and you can pick new cards. And like you said, it does require work, but I have, in my personal experience, changed different things about my personality or things about myself that I wasn't so happy about. And it took some awareness and dedication, but I know it's possible. So I love that from the start, from the get-go, you are putting the frame that you're not defined by that style. It can show you where you are, maybe where there needs to be some growth, and then we'll talk about strategies later. But this is fantastic. So Kevin, you have one more thing to add, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a joke. I said, talking about this is reminding me of the Meet the Fockers movie. Don't infantilize him, Fokker. We're Ferberizing him. I don't know if anyone listening remembers that movie, right? It's the second.
Learning to self-soothe.
Yeah. They were doing this method where they were basically ignoring the kid, no matter how much he cried, no matter what he did, So think about the destruction happening there later in life.
Truly, that kid probably became a very avoidant kid.
So why is it important for people to know about these attachment styles?
Yeah, so honestly, like what you just said earlier is the big one. Like once you kind of learn, personally for me, when I first learned about attachment styles and realized I had this anxious attachment, I was like, wow, this makes so much sense. It kind of puts to words everything that I'm feeling. And now that I kind of understand why I am the way that I am, I can change it, because it's not fun being super anxiously attached. It's not fun being super avoidantly attached. And what's even worse is that there's a lot of studies and like psychology that goes behind it. But when you're an anxious person and you're an avoidant person, you tend to date each other. And that relationship is literally just like the worst relationships you could possibly be in. And it's basically like my entire dating life in a nutshell up until recently. So yeah, like understanding it gives you the power to just become healthier in relationships. Yeah.
I love that point. And this is something that we talk about, whether, you're talking about astrology or human design or gene keys or any of these things. I think it's really important for people to understand that they will tell you your predisposition. They will tell you maybe how you're wired, but that you can do work, you can do things to change that. And you don't have to suffer with whatever style that's not working for you.
Right.
And then the next question that I wanted to ask is, this is a great segue, which is, you mentioned if you have two different, avoidant and anxious, and they tend to gravitate towards each other and they're terrible relationships. I don't want to necessarily talk specifically about just that style. The question really is, well, what happens if your partner is a different style? And maybe you can give us some examples of, different styles, how they work and how they don't work.
Yeah, totally. So your partner most likely will be a different style than you. It's not often that like the only thing that is off that you see often in relationships is a secure person dating a secure person.
That's us.
There you go. There you go. But like an avoidant person and an avoidant person will never form a deep relationship because they're both avoiding the intimacy. An anxious person will just make another anxious person more anxious, and they probably won't be very happy. Not that they'd be happy, anxious and avoidant, but it's just more messy. But the question about like how, I guess, should I go first into how to tell if your partner or you have a certain style and kind of like describe them each?
Yeah, I think that'd be a good
Yeah.
a good way to get into the styles. Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I like to explain that like avoidant of I'll break it down into dismissive avoidant and fearful avoidant. So dismissive avoidant is the like just uninterested in deep relationships, uninterested in getting close, not necessarily commitment phobes, because that's more fearful avoidant. But dismissive avoidant is just when someone starts to become close to them, they just want to keep their distance because intimacy just feels uncomfortable. They just essentially they feel like they don't want it. So they're very independent people. They're very they're not good at like expressing their emotions. They don't want to express their emotions. And then fearful avoidant people want to be intimate, but it scares the shit out of them. Like they're like, us sharing our feelings is scary. I can't do this. Or like, I see us getting close and you're going to hurt me. You're going to break up with me. Like, this is scary. They push it away. Anxious people like me, which I'm just slightly anxious because I work on it all the time, obviously. And anxious people are the people that tend to be, the clingers, that tend to be the ones that are labeled as crazy because we try to not be anxious at first and show that side of us, but then we get in deep relationships and all of a sudden we're needy and like people will be like, oh wow, that person's crazy. So we're very we want to be close. We overthink relationships. I'm sorry, I made like a list, so I made sure I like hit every point I wanted to. And we have a very stark fear of rejection. So that's another thing that's usually a very guiding factor for anxiously attached people, is that they are scared that they'll be rejected. So they do all the things that people pleasing, like pleasing their partner over their needs. That's very common of anxiously attached people. And then securely attached people like you two and like everyone hopes to be, is that, emotion, like they might not necessarily be great at expressing their emotions, but they don't fear it. They are okay with talking about their emotions. They don't rush into relationships, but they also don't avoid them. They are able to respect boundaries. Boundaries are really another big way to determine someone's attachment style, whether or not they can respect them or have zero lack of them. But secure attached people are respectful of boundaries and have their own and can set them. So that's like the way to be able to tell if you have what style you have, what style your partner has. And then once you determine that, there's like a whole slew of ways that you can be a better partner depending on your attachment style.
Yeah. So that was great. I really appreciated that because that really makes it easier for people to understand, well, what attachment style am I versus my partner? And then the question we come back to is, what happens if your partner is different? So, give us just a couple maybe examples from that slew.
Yeah, totally. So if your partner is an anxiously attached person, really what I think it's really important to say that, like, obviously if someone struggles really hard with an attachment style, the work needs to come from them too. Like, you can't make someone change themselves. Like, that person needs to want to change themselves. But as far as like, if you're dating an anxiously attached person, doing things like having open communication with them, do like weekly check-ins with them, just understanding more this like driving like overthinking anxiety that they have in relationships, and being a bit more patient will be really helpful. And then if your partner is avoidantly attached, that they may need things to be taken more slowly. They'll probably need more communication, but in the sense of like understanding and helping guide them to understanding their feelings, because avoidants tend to just not want to talk about it, and therefore aren't as in touch with their feelings. So really, if you realize that like there's two different attachment styles, there are definitely ways to mediate them. But I'm going to go back to like the avoidant and anxious. It's actually known as like the avoidant anxious trap. It is very hard to be in a relationship with someone if you have an anxious attachment style and they have an avoidant one, because it tends to be like the anxious person will like want to cling to the relationship more, and that clinginess makes the avoidant person want to pull away, and that pulling away makes the person that's anxious want to cling more, and then it's just like a vicious cycle of never really meeting each other's needs. So that one's hard, with a lot of communication and personal work to work on each attachment style personally. It could change, but it is very hard.
So I find this fascinating. Obviously, it's just so funny. It's not really funny, but like to see how such opposite are drawn to each other, how like you choose people that will just push the exact button that you need to heal and grow from, basically. And that's really what this is bringing. And it's reminding me of something from my personal experience in a previous relationship where I think I've always been secure, but I definitely still had things around really feeling accepted for who I was or who I am. And in that relationship, it was really showing up that I wanted moments where I was allowed to be what I called be the baby, where I would just kind of sit on his lap and he would just like stroke my hair or just hold me. And I could like allow myself to be in baby energy, which is absolutely not sexy when you're thinking about it for your relationship. But we created this term where I was like, can I be the baby? Like I would literally ask for it. And I could have like a 5-10 minutes window where I could get into this, and he would hold me and just kind of like let me be in there, never like judging me or anything. And then it was over. And at the beginning of the relationship, I think I was doing it fairly often. And I believe that it might have taken maybe a year or so. And then it's something that I basically never had to do again. And then by the time I got into the relationship with Kevin, I never did this with you, never had to do that. But what I'm realizing is the ability to be in touch with your needs and to be willing to express them and then find strategies is really, I guess, how you can move past that. And I'm sure we'll talk more about strategies in a little bit, but I thought that it was a good story to illustrate, because honestly, having to admit that you want to be the baby and that, I mean, it's not very, again, like it's very vulnerable. It's kind of embarrassing, but it was so healing. And to have a partner who was willing to play along and hold that energy for me for those few minutes, and then we could move on, was really a big transformation.
That's so interesting. I think that goes back to, we moved from our parents to romantic relationships, and, maybe there's somewhere you felt like that need wasn't met to the full extent that you needed it to with your parents. And then you replace that with your romantic partner. And yeah, I mean, it might sound weird or whatever, but like it's a need you needed and now you don't. And that's so interesting because you were able to fulfill it in a romantic relationship. And I guess, like you said, it takes a partner who's willing to and open to it and non-judgmental.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example. And I would also caution people to not get stuck in those areas, right? Because the whole point of that was really to heal that aspect of you, that place where maybe your parents were constantly forcing you to always be the grown-up adult one and never allowing you to really just be a kid, it might come from there. But once you were able to do that, then you could let it go. And I think maybe that's an important point to make, is that try not, when you're working on these things, to get stuck in those patterns, right?
Yeah, I see that a lot with the anxious attached community, because they, flock to me with my content that I put out into the internet. Is that some of them just don't realize that things can be different, right? Like they overthink, they worry, they're super jealous, and they don't realize that putting in the work, they can change it. They're not a victim. You're not a victim. You're never going to be a victim. You can work on yourself and it can change. And we talked about it before, but it's just like playing into the victim card. Like you can't just be like, oh, I have an anxious attachment style, woe is me, this is my life. Like you can change things.
Yeah. So strategies are great to help us when we need them. And ultimately what we want to do is try to move past, try to heal whatever that thing is.
Right.
So we use the strategies while we need them, and then we try to move past it. I think is the most important point for people when they're really struggling with something like that, is to not, like you said, not get stuck in victim and just be there forever.
So we're going to talk more about sexuality and attachment style and how it affects all of that, and dive more into this. But before that, we want to do a little sponsor break here and thank Onnit for sponsoring today's show. And if you know about those times where you're like so focused into what you're doing, you close that big deal, you win that game, you make love for hours and everything is effortless and it just flows, you have just now been in touch with what's called the flow state. And flow state is the optimal level of consciousness where you can perform at your best. Now, sometimes it can happen on its own, or you can help yourself get to a flow state. And that's when Onnit and Alpha Brain comes into focus. Alpha Brain helps you achieve a flow state and support other aspects of cognitive function for better memory, focus, and mental processing. So if you want to give Alpha Brain a try and really get into that zone state, go to onnit.com. It's ONNIT.com, and use our coupon code LOVELAB to save 10% off your purchase. So go to Onnit and use coupon code LOVELAB at the checkout.
I would love to tell our audience, I've never actually said this, but the way that you really support this show is by buying the products from the sponsors. Like, if you really want to support what we're doing, if there's something that appeals to you, like you're like, wow, yeah, I could use some flow state and some Alpha Brain, like you got to actually buy it. That's how you support the program.
And that's how we keep giving you free content.
Exactly.
So Kirstie, how do attachment style affect your sex life? Because we are on the Love Lab podcast. We love to get into that. So tell us more.
Yeah, it's actually so interesting. It's definitely interesting. I mean, it applies so directly. The different attachment styles are able to communicate their needs or meet someone's needs in different ways. Secure people tend to have, actually studies show that secure people have the best sex lives. Yeah. Like, that's true. Secure people are able to speak their needs. They're able to communicate with their partner and, meet the partner's needs. Avoidant people, we'll go into avoidant first. Avoidant people tend to just kind of focus on themselves. And so they see sex as like a very primal, like just get it in and get it done. And like, they don't want that intimacy necessarily. So, things like cuddling and stuff, like afterwards is not their type of thing. They might be a little bit more selfish, but not necessarily like maliciously, like they're not trying to be, but it's just naturally to them. Like they don't see sex as this like connecting thing. It's just, let's feel good. Let's get this over with. Like sex is great, but like, that's all it is. And then anxious people, and I found this true in my sex life, is that I always had, issues speaking up for, or I always say like advocating for my orgasm, like speaking up for my needs, communicating. studies also show that anxious people are more likely to have painful sex. They're more likely to orgasm less. They're more likely to have their needs met. They just feel more awkward about speaking because they see sex as this like they see it as so much more of the emotional aspect than the physical aspect. They want validation, so they have sex with people. They want to be close with someone, so they have sex. They want the idea like we are together and I know this because we are having sex. So they don't care necessarily if they're having good sex. They don't care if it hurts. They just want their partner to be pleasured. And so, yeah, it's wild, but yeah, it applies directly to like the sex life. Yeah.
Is there a correlation between gender and particular attachment styles? Because in a sense, when you're describing the avoidance, and I'm making a generalization, this describes some of the behavior that people attribute to the masculine, while the anxious describes some of the like negative descriptions of the feminine. And I was curious if there's any study or research that shows like one gender tends to go towards one or the other more.
That's actually a great question. I don't think I've ever really looked into that. But if I had to guess, I would 100% agree with what you just said, in the sense that men aren't coddled as much as children as women are, because men are taught like their emotions aren't good, like shut that down, like that's like suppress that. And women are taught to be the caregivers and loving and be able to show their needs and their emotions and everything. So I could see that 100% correlating to men tend to be the more avoidant, scared to talk about their emotions, just more shut off, and women tend to be wanting the more affection, because that's what we're taught is important in life and just how we're raised and everything.
And I'm sure that it flips around too, because I know several women that would fit into the avoidant, and I've met plenty of men who were in the anxious and needy category too. We're just making generalization, but I was just being curious in that moment about that.
Yeah, but you know that is actually a fascinating observation because Kirstie, as you pointed out, parents do tend to treat boys different from girls. And
Right.
so, what we're talking about here is how your parents raised you, how they treated you is what is creating these types of attachment styles. So it totally makes sense. I have a feeling after this show, this might be a new article that Kirstie will be writing.
Right?
When you do share it with us.
Exactly. No, that's a great question. I'm sure there are studies out there. It's wild how many studies are out there on attachment style, and when it just came out in like the 50s. But I'm sure it's out there.
There's one other thing that I kind of want to sort of stress that we were just talking about, which is that when people talk about attachment styles, they're usually talking about how to have a relationship. Like, how do you have a relationship?
Mm-hmm.
But what you were sharing about how it affects your sex life is extremely important as well. And I don't really hear people talking about attachment styles in relations to how they actually have sex in the bedroom. Like why maybe they're not interested in going deeper in sex, why maybe all they want is just the physical, why they might want more of the cuddling and, that kind of stuff. And I think that's really fascinating. I think, a lot of times if people are feeling frustrated in their sexual relationship because all he ever wants to do is just, hurry up and get it over with, or all she ever wants to do, like, wow, imagine taking this framework now and putting it around that experience and going, oh, wait a minute, maybe that's because of this, right? Mm-hmm. So that's fascinating. I don't really hear people talking about attachment styles very often when it comes to sex. It's always about, well, are we in the right relationship? Are we compatible? How do we, get along? That kind of stuff. So
yeah, there's so much research out there on that correlation, sexuality and sex satisfaction and attachment style. But you're right, people don't talk about it that much. And there was even when I was researching it, when I first came across it, there was something that I came across was that anxious people tend to nitpick. We tend to nitpick. We tend to be the ones that are like, this can be improved upon, this can be improved upon. Like we're always like the anxiety ones. And or they relate their relationship satisfaction to ideas that they have about relationships. Like, we need to be having sex like 5 times a week or else we're not happy, even if that's personally not what would make them happy. And I've done that before. I've been like, we're not having sex enough, even though I'm like, I don't have a super high sex drive anyway. So I'm just like, but I'm like, we need to be having sex all the time, or that means that we're not in a good relationship. So it is really fascinating. And it's crazy that people aren't talking about it that much. You're right. Yeah.
So, what are the things that can help you be a better partner? So now we know about these attachment style. We know that they can get in the way, but then how do you become a better partner? You've figured out your attachment style. Now what?
Yeah. This is a great one. I love talking about this. So if you have an anxious attachment style and overthinking and worrying and all of that is something that really affects your love life. Something that can be really great is having a set weekly check-in or even bi-weekly check-in. So it's something that you can look forward to. You know that there is always going to be, it's great to have open communication. I'm not saying to harbor all of your feelings. But since we do tend to nitpick and tend to like overthink things, maybe having that once a week time where you can take inventory of the relationship as a whole is going to help you relax you a little bit and be like, all right, we always have this time, even if it's bi-weekly, to check in and like talk about things as a whole. That can be really good. In general, just like journaling your thoughts. So your thoughts are always just going to control your mind until you stop letting them. If you are an overthinker and you're constantly worried about like your boyfriend texts you and you're like, what does this text mean? And you're like suddenly like thinking about it for hours, write it down. That thought will have so much less power when you write it down. Write down what you think the worst case scenario is, which is probably that they left you forever. Write down what the most normal, like probable case scenario is, which is they're busy at work. And then like reason with yourself and be like, all right, it's probably the probable one. My thoughts are just running away from me. And on that note, once your thought is proved wrong, like your partner texts you and they're like, oh, I'm just busy at work, sorry. Remember that. Write it down. Go back when you're feeling really anxious and look at all the times that your thoughts were wrong, and you'll slowly start to change them. And on that note, with changing them, when you say like, oh, my partner hates me, they're mad at me, change that thought. Be like, my partner is a human and he's taking time to himself because he wants to just relax, and that's okay. Like, just actively change those thoughts. If you have an avoidant attachment style, what can really help you think differently about things is changing your mindset from like this I mindset, like it's me against you when we fight. My needs are how this relationship will be the happiest. Like, I need to look out for myself, to a we mindset. Like, when you're in a relationship, you're a team, right? So instead, when you get into arguments, instead of being like, you're being too needy, be like, how can we come to a solution where you feel comfortable and I feel comfortable? What does that look like? Going from that I to that we mindset is really helpful. And then another thing actually that's really interesting with avoidant people is that it tends to stem from a lack of self-confidence, which is really interesting because that's the same for anxious people, but they tend to feel very insecure, and so they push people away again because they don't want to get hurt. So doing anything in general that will help with your self-confidence is going to help with your relationship. So that's working through like any, insecurities or traumas that you have, which can be really deep, and, maybe therapy needs to be involved, but doing things like, doing things that really make you happy, pursuing hobbies, starting a new hobby, keeping in contact with your friends, or even doing something with your partner that makes you feel very self-confident, like, starting a new hobby together, and you foster that intimacy along with that pride and self-confidence. And then, secure people are pretty A-okay with relationships. Just keep doing what you're doing, have great communication and everything. I can get into some more. I don't know if that was thorough, but
That was fantastic.
Well, yeah, and
Yeah.
if people are really interested, there's so much more that they can dive into. I don't know if you work one-on-one with people, but they can work with you as far as getting deeper into that. But I think that was a really good sort of overall, like, here are some basic tips, some basic things that you can do to try to help if you are one of these particular styles. So yeah, I think that was great.
Right.
And even as a secure person, everything that Kirstie just laid out, like do all of this. I mean, we do all of these things already. And sometimes it always makes me wonder, I mean, which one comes first? The chicken, the egg? You know, are we secure because we know how to do these things? Or like,
Right.
Yeah.
which one did it come first, you know?
Yeah,
So
and honestly, if we were to probably sit back and think about, relationships from, 10, 20, 25, 30, in my case, years ago, we might see that we acted very, very differently back then than we do now. So it's likely that we've changed our attachment
100%.
styles.
Yeah. I mean, I always say like healthy relationships don't just happen, they happen with intention. And that goes for anyone, anxious, avoidant, secure. And then also, Kevin, you made such a good point. If you're interested in this stuff, there's books out there. A really great book that everyone would recommend in the relationship world is Attached by Amir Levine. He puts all of this really well into an amazing book. But if it is something that we really struggle with, just do more research. Yeah, you can talk to me, you can DM me, we can talk. But if it is significantly affecting your life, which it does for a lot of people, just doing more research on the subject and reading books on it is going to help significantly.
ooh, so we have one more question for you, Kirstie, before you can tell our listener where they can find you. And so we are curious, what is your best sexual talent?
Oh gosh. All right. Like specifics? Can I
Oh,
get
yes.
Oh, geez. Okay. Let's see. That's a great question. What is my best sexual talent? I feel like I'm gonna say this, and a lot of girls have said this, but I always get a lot of compliments on my blowjob giving skills. Um, I think also like I've always been really communicative, and again with like the anxious attachment style, maybe I'm like always like, what can I do better? So I've just always asked guys and been like, what feels really good? Like, what is the best way to do this? Like, what do you like? And so I like to think my blowjob giving skills are my best talent.
Good for you.
A great skill to have.
Yeah, we applaud. Kirstie, can you tell our listener where they can find more of you? And also, I know you have a special gift for our listeners as well.
Yeah, totally. So you can find me on Instagram, which is Words with Kirstie, and Kirstie is Kirstie. I'm also on TikTok, and I know it's a newer platform, but I honestly have so many videos out there. So if videos are your thing, that's a great place to find me, which is just Kirstie Taylor, but Taylor has 2 R's at the end. And then I have a free boundaries guide for everyone that's listening, which is essentially, if you don't know what boundaries are, it teaches you what boundaries are, asks you questions to help you get more aligned with what your authentic boundaries are, and teaches you how to be able to stand up for yourself and maintain them in your relationships. And there's like some journaling sections and everything. So you can find that in the show notes.
Yes, we will have a link to it in the show notes. Boundaries could be a whole show in and of itself. Most people are terrible at setting and keeping boundaries. So
get that guide.
I highly recommend you get the guide.
Click in the link in the description and grab it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. And then also, same thing, I also wrote a book, which is currently out for pre-orders, and you can find that in all the links in my bios. And the same thing, I always say, like, if you buy the book, let me know and I'll give you the boundaries guide. But regardless, if you can't, for some reason, find the boundaries guide, DM me and I will send you the link.
And what's the title of your book?
Oh, sorry. I'm so bad at that. I'm like the worst at promoting it. The book is called What I Wish I Knew About Love. So essentially, since I'm a dating and relationship writer, I really wanted all of the lessons and the research and everything that I've culminated to be put into one book, along with really great, juicy stories and everything, to help guide people through everything from breakups to self-love, dating, and creating a thriving relationship. So it's all of that into one book, and it's called What I Wish I Knew About Love.
That sounds fantastic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So check that one out too.
Mm-hmm.
Kirstie, thank you so much for the great work you're doing and helping people with. It was a pleasure having you on today's show.
Yeah, thank you both. This was a lot of fun.
All right, everybody, that's all the time we have for this episode, and we will see you next week. We hope you liked this episode of the Love Lab podcast. If you enjoy this show, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends.
And for more free, exclusive content, join us in the Passion Vault at CelineRemy.com/vault. That's CelineRemy.com/vault.
Thanks for listening.
And remember, you're amazing.